The snow in Seattle had a way of falling without urgency. Not the wild kind that blinds you, not the cheerful flakes from postcards, but a quiet, persistent snow that soaked through coats and settled into bones. The kind that reminded you how small you were even in a city built of glass and steel. Callum Reed pulled his collar higher as he stepped out the back entrance of his office building. It was Christmas Eve, well past 9. The parking lot was nearly empty, the city muted under a thin white blanket. Most people were home by now with families' warm kitchens and the comfort of familiar voices. Callum had none of that waiting for him. He paused for a moment, keys in hand, staring at the reflection of his own tired face in the darkened glass. 47 years old, founder of a company people admired. A life that looked complete from the outside and felt hollow on the inside. That was when he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind. It slid through the narrow alley behind the building, rattling trash lids and carrying the distant hum of traffic. But then it came again. Softer this time. Fragile, Mr. Callum froze. He turned slowly, his shoes crunching against the thin ice on the pavement. The alley was dim, lit only by a flickering security light halfway down the wall. Snow drifted lazily through the beam. And there, between two overflowing dumpsters, was a small shape curled into itself. A child. She could not have been more than 5. Maybe younger. Her body was wrapped in an oversized coat that clearly did not belong to her, the sleeves swallowing her hands. One small shoe clung crookedly to her foot. The other was missing entirely. Callum's chest tightened. She was sitting on flattened cardboard knees, pulled up to her chest, a worn backpack tucked under her head like a pillow. Her hair, dark and softly tangled, clung to her cheeks, damp from melting snow. Her face was flushed red, not from warmth, but from the cold biting at her skin. For a long moment, Callum could not move. He had negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. Had stood in hospital corridors years ago, hearing words that fractured his world. And yet, the sight of this small, silent child brought him to a standstill. Her lips trembled as she looked up at him, eyes too tired for someone so young. "I'm just trying to find my mom," she whispered. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Callum stepped closer, careful not to startle her. The cold air stung his face, but suddenly he felt unbearably warm. His heart racing, his thoughts tangled. "Hey," he said, gently lowering himself to one knee. "It's okay. You're okay." She didn't cry. That was what struck him most. There was no panic in her expression, just exhaustion. The kind that comes after you have been afraid for too long. "She works at a hospital," the girl murmured, her voice hoarse. "She said if I got lost, I should go where there are lights." Callum swallowed hard. His hands hesitated before he slowly unwound the scarf from around his neck and wrapped it around her shoulders, careful, respectful. She clutched it instinctively, her fingers stiff and bluish with cold. "You did the right thing," he said, surprised by the tremor in his own voice. "You were very brave." She leaned into the warmth without protest, her small body shockingly cold through the fabric. Snow continued to fall, settling quietly around them. The city stood still, as if holding its breath. Callum pulled out his phone and dialed for help, his voice steady but only just. As he gave the address, he glanced down at the child again, at the way her eyelids fluttered heavy with fatigue. Somewhere deep inside him, a memory stirred. A hospital room, a tiny hand once held. A promise he had failed to keep. And in that narrow alley on a night meant for miracles, Callum Reed realized something had already changed. He was no longer just passing through. The siren arrived sooner than Callum expected, slicing through the quiet snowfall like a blade of light and sound. Red and white reflections bounced off the wet brick walls, turning the narrow alley into a small, trembling stage. 2 paramedics stepped out, boots crunching on ice, their movements brisk but careful. Callum didn't loosen his hold on the girl. He felt the chill of her body through his coat, the way her breathing fluttered shallow against his chest. "She's been out here a while," he said, keeping his voice steady. "She's cold. I think she might be sick." One of the paramedics nodded already, wrapping a thermal blanket around her small frame. "Good call," he murmured. "Hypothermia is a real risk." The girl barely stirred as they worked. Her head rested against Callum's shoulder, trusting in a way that unsettled him. When the oxygen mask hovered near her face, her eyes opened briefly. "Don't worry," Callum whispered. "They're here to help." She searched his face as if committing it to memory, then relaxed again. The paramedic glanced at him. "You can ride with us if you want. You found her." Callum hesitated for half a heartbeat. Somewhere a part of his mind ticked through obligations, an empty house, a son waiting with a sitter, unanswered messages on his phone. But none of it mattered. "Yes," he said, "I'll come." Inside the ambulance, the air was warm and smelled faintly of antiseptic and rubber. The girl's color improved slowly as heat returned to her skin. Callum sat close, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the stretcher, careful not to overwhelm her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She swallowed, then whispered, "Elowen." "It's a beautiful name," he said, and meant it. Her lips curved just enough to suggest a smile. "My mom picked it." The ambulance rolled through the city lights, blurring past snow-dusted storefronts and darkened windows. Callum watched the girl's chest rise and fall, counting breaths without realizing it. With each block, the weight in his chest grew heavier. At the hospital doors slid open to a familiar rush of sounds, footsteps, distant voices, the steady hum of machines. Nurses moved quickly, practiced and calm. Elowen was lifted gently from his arms, and for the first time since he had found her, Callum felt the cold fully settle into his own bones. A nurse looked up at him. "Do you know where her parents might be?" "She said her mom works here," Callum replied. "She was trying to find her." The nurse exchanged a glance with a colleague. "We'll check the records." They wheeled Elowen away, leaving Callum standing in the hallway, hands empty, heart unsteady. He followed until he was asked to wait, then stopped, feeling oddly unsure of where to put himself. Hospitals had always done this to him. The smell, the lighting, the way time felt different inside these walls, stretched thin, heavy with memory. He leaned back against the cool tile and closed his eyes. Years ago, he had stood in a place like this, listening to a doctor explain things he hadn't been ready to hear. He remembered the sound of monitors, the tight grip of a hand that grew weaker by the minute. He remembered promising he would be right there, that he wasn't going anywhere, and then being too late. A nurse approached, breaking the memory. "Sir, we found a possible match." Callum's heart jumped. Her mother. "There's a woman in intensive care," the nurse said carefully. "Admitted last night. Unidentified. She collapsed while working." Working? Callum followed her down the hall, each step heavier than the last. In the ICU, the light dimmed, and the air felt dense, humming with quiet urgency.